4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, hello, hello. It must be Thursday because we are here live on LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook and all the places to do one simple thing. My name is Holly Holiday. I am your J.E.D.I master, and this is J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion strategies in 15 minutes or less. So today's topic is really going to be about myth busting. And one of those myths that we have is that when we talk about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or DEI, or IDEA, or DEIB, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, whichever letters work best for you. When we talk about that, so frequently people want to boil that down to only being about a person's race. Well, here's the myth buster. Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is not only about race. Justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion is about a recognition that all people show up in a way that allows them to bring all the ways that they are and that they live and that they exist to the table. But it also is a fundamental acknowledgement that all of the ways in which we can show up in our various identities, that in some of those places and spaces, those identities are marginalized. And that marginalization occurs because of a systemic barrier or norm that we need to address. Now, sometimes the strategy for addressing this is about being equal. Sometimes the strategy for addressing this is about equality. Most of the time, we need to be looking at systems. And so when we think about that, we think about all the ways in which our workplace in particular, because that's what I try to focus on, but frankly, any environment, how does that impact or prevent us from having the same experience or the intended experience? Let's not talk about sameness. Let's talk about what our intent of our experience is. And so that's exactly what justice, equity, diversity, inclusion looks like. Sometimes we can't have a similar experience because our identity is threatened. We don't feel safe. Something about what's happening in the environment somehow shrinks us and makes us feel like we can't be full participants. Sometimes we can't show up in our full spaces because people are making judgments about us, because there are stereotypes, because we have appearance judgments simply by the way I look. There's been a judgment that negatively impacts the way that I'm able to experience the environment. Sometimes I show up to the environment and I'm mislabeled because they make an assumption about what my identity is. And so they label it one way or another that doesn't feel authentic and thus shrinks me. Sometimes I am simply a victim of bias. And bias is something that's not necessarily good or bad, but it impacts me negatively because of this unconscious and conscious assumptions that are made around who I am and who I might be. Sometimes I don't feel like included because I'm a victim of microaggressions, which are those tiny indignities that communicate to me in some way that I am less than. And usually the point of departure has to do with the way that I'm showing up in my identity. So in all these ways and in all the various ways in which we show up, whether it is around our gender, whether it is around our race, whether it's around our culture, whether it's around our disability or lack of disability, whether it's around even the way we look, whether it's around the way in which we practice a faith tradition or not practice a faith tradition. All of these factors contribute, even where we may be from, maybe because of where we're from. So all of these factors contribute to what it is to be part of an inclusive community. So if you have a holistic workplace program that is affirmatively trying to institute policies around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, then that policy should be broader than and consider more than just race. However, and this is the important part, but race being an important part of that conversation is essential. It is essential. In this country, we started out with this idea, this grand idea, where we would come together because religion was something that we were not necessarily feeling from other places. And so European settlers came and they originated, they came to explore new opportunities of inclusion. But immediately, almost immediately, they started to use divisionary tactics. And those divisionary tactics, while they did not start with race, they certainly were perfected in the way that race was used to divide people one from another. First with the native population, and then soon with African people who would soon become part of chattel slavery. We have evolved beyond that, but yet and still those systems of oppression still are with us today. And even though it is not our intent to exercise oppression, we have yet to really dismantle all of the ways in which we have built oppression into our system. And now what started out as oppression for one particular thing, and specifically in this country around race, we now use to oppress others. So if you are wondering whether or not justice, equity, diversity, inclusion program would be appropriate for your workplace, consider this. Look around and consider the impact that your workplace has on your staff. Do your staff all show up in a way that brings value to your organization? Do you find that some show up more than others? Because again, when you're looking at whether or not you need to think about having an affirmative diversity, equity, inclusion program, you're really seeking to dismantle those barriers and to create a system that is engaging and welcoming to all. I'm not going to spend, I think that gives you a lot to think about. And so this has been J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live. We are here every week at 12 o'clock on the dot. I think we've been on time every week. I think this is week 6 maybe. And we will be back next week. I'm going to encourage you, should you need additional insight or want some perspective on an issue that you're dealing with in your workplace or in your organization, feel free to email us questions at J.E.D.I, J-E.D.I, at holidayadvisors.com. Next week, we're going to look at some of the ways in which we can really dig into training. When do you know you need training? Do you need, and what kind of training do you need? And how do you know if it's going to be effective? Because it seems like everybody's getting trained, but we may not be seeing a real difference in what's happening in our workplace. So next week, we'll dive into our training question. Don't forget, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at J.E.D.I at holidayadvisors.com. And before you sign off, make sure that you like, share, subscribe to our social media channels on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. If you love this content, if you like seeing me on this computer screen and you want to get more of it, like, share, subscribe to our social media channels on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. We look forward to seeing you next week. Bye. Join me next Thursday for a new edition of J.E.D.I Lunch Break Live right here on LinkedIn.